Yes, hello, everybody. Good afternoon here from Vienna. Good morning and good evening to all of you. We're about to start our meeting of the Political Affairs and Security Committee. Greetings from the Hofburg in Vienna. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and I'm broadcasted live. I will not repeat all the technical requirements and advice that has been already transmitted to all delegations in the previous meetings. We will be following the same procedures. I just want to remind you that to ensure a smooth meeting, I kindly advise all participants to mute your microphones when you are not speaking. Finally, please turn on video only when given the floor and keep your camera off. Without further ado, I would like to pass the virtual floor to the chair of the General Committee on Political Affairs and Security of the Oec Parliamentary Assembly, Congressman Richard Hudson from Washington. You have the floor, Mr. Hudson.
Thank you, Gustavo. I call the General Committee of Political Affairs and Security to order. Dear colleagues, greetings from Washington, D.C. This is the first formal sitting of our committee since the pandemic turned all of our lives upside down so many months ago. I would have loved to see you in person in Vienna, of course, but in any case, I'm glad that we're meeting in formal session today. I know there are new members of our committee joining us for the first time, and I'm glad to welcome you, even under these unusual circumstances. Before we start with the formal agenda of the meeting, I have a couple of administrative announcements to make related to technical challenges of running this meeting online. As you will see from our draft agenda, we are limited to 2 hours of formal meeting time. We will hear from our rapporteur and then a number of presenters from the OSCE governmental side before we have our traditional exchange of views. As you can imagine, planning the meeting under these circumstances requires us to be unusually disciplined in how we proceed. So I want to share with you now how the meeting will run. First, for technical reasons, while I chair this meeting, I've asked Gustavo and his colleagues in the Secretariat to help manage the general debate portion of our meeting today. Second, the list of interventions. Per instructions sent to all delegations on February 18th, the list of those wishing to take the floor in the general debate was formally closed about 2 hours ago. Our list of members seeking the floor during the debate already has 23 names on it. That said, I know some colleagues may wish to add their names to the list should time allow. If that's the case, I encourage members to register their interest through the chat function. And if time allows, we'll try to add you to the end of the list of the folks that we already have. In any case, I've asked the Secretary to close the list completely 30 minutes into this meeting. Third, time limits. I know we all value the opportunity to address the senior officials who are with us today and to exchange views with each other. I think we all know that I've never been shy about sharing my views with you in the past. But as I've said before, one of my main priorities as your chairman is to put my own views aside and to do my best to make sure everyone's voice is heard to the greatest extent possible. That said, we're under very tight time constraints because of the limited time we have for our interpreters. And so I'm asking you to please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. I may also have to reduce that time a little bit further if circumstances require it. But out of respect to your colleagues, I would ask each of you to please pay attention to the timer that will be shown on the screen and conclude your remarks promptly at the end of your 3 minutes. And finally, I want to inform you all that unfortunately for me, we have votes ongoing here in the US Congress. And at some point, I'm going to be pulled away from our discussions. But I thank you in advance for your allow me to do that. But you will be in the very capable hands of our Vice Chair, Mr. Costel de Nova. And I thank the Vice Chair for stepping in as will be needed during this meeting. First order of business is to adopt the agenda for today's meeting. The agenda was distributed to delegations on February 8th. The Secretariat has not received any comments on the agenda, so I'll assume there are no objections to its adoption. So adopted. Thank you, colleagues. We can now move beyond the administrative announcements and into the substance of our meetings. I am now on agenda item 2, opening remarks. Colleagues, I want to start by thanking the Secretariat for the huge efforts they have made behind the scenes to help us continue this important work despite the challenges that have been presented by the pandemic. I also want to thank my colleagues in the leadership of the committee, Vice Chair Donava and Rapporteur Kashonis, for their consistent engagement and great partnership with me. Since we last formally met as a committee, our engagement on critical issues in the OSCE space has been consistent and impactful. We've issued statements on issues including the war in Ukraine and challenges facing the OSCE monitoring mission there and on the territorial integrity of Georgia. We held a webinar to exchange views on COVID-19's impact on conflicts in the OSCE area, and we've participated in dialogues and statements on institutional challenges facing the OSCE, on responding to the pandemic, on political events in Belarus, Russia, and Georgia, and on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. These discussions have underlined the depth of the challenges to the political and security environment in the OSCE area that is the remit of this committee. But they have also confirmed the validity of the principles enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act and the unique role of parliamentarians and parliamentary diplomacy to addressing these challenges. I'm proud of the work we have managed to do during this period, and I've regularly briefed my colleagues in the US Congress on our work. That said, I think I can speak for all of us when I say that I'm eager to return to a more traditional way of working, and especially the opportunity to exchange views with you face to face. Today, we're taking one step forward towards that goal by returning to our more traditional calendar of events. We will hear from our committee rapporteur on his views for a report and resolution that will form the basis of our deliberations at the annual session in July. We will also hear from an extraordinary slate of speakers from the governmental side of the OSCE. Now, before I formally turn to our next agenda item, I do want to acknowledge one way in which we are falling short of our aspirations. Like many of my colleagues, I am conscious of the importance of the role of women in the issues of conflict resolution, peace, and security. The way we structure our discussions is one way in which we ourselves can make a contribution in this area. So I want to underline that I'm aware that our agenda today does not exhibit the gender balance so effectively advocated by so many of my good friends and colleagues here in the Assembly. And I want to assure you all that this is not by design or oversight. Rather, the committee traditionally invites the leaders of the relevant OSCE institutions to our committee every year, and all of these positions happen to be filled by men at this time. I can only say that I join with you in celebrating the groundbreaking era of the current OSCE institutional leadership, which sees for the first time women in the roles of chairman in office and secretary general. Colleagues, this concludes my opening remarks. Let us now turn to the third item on our agenda. We will now hear from our committee rapporteur, my friend, Laurenas Kashunas, on his plans for this year's committee report and resolution. Mr. Kashunas, you have the screen.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, dear colleagues, let me start. Few months ago, we all marked the 45th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act and the 13th anniversary of the Paris Charter for a New Europe, the two documents that form the foundation of our common security. Many commemorative events were organized in Vienna and in our respective capitals. Many speeches of our commitment to the basic OSCE principles were made. However, celebrations and nice speeches aside, the reality on the ground was not so shiny. At the very same time, in some OSCE participating states, these fundamental OSCE principles continued to be violated. From military aggression against neighboring countries, occupations and illegal annexations of their territories, to blatant violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms, from non-implementation of previously undertaken commitments to unprecedented internal repressions against political opposition, peaceful protesters, and independent media. This is what we witness regretfully every day. In her presentations to the OSCE Permanent Council last month, the OSCE chairperson in office, the Swedish Foreign Minister Ann Linde, emphasized her strong dedication to the peaceful and lasting resolution of enduring conflicts in OSCE area. Regretfully, across OSCE area, force continues to be employed as a method to alter established territorial borders, in blatant disregard of overstates' sovereign rights and international law. This Friday, February 26, we will mark the 7th anniversary of the start of Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. We continue to condemn this in strongest possible terms, and we will insist our governments to maintain respective sanctions against Russia until sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders is fully restored. Let me use this opportunity to once again reiterate our collective call on Russia to stop its aggression against neighboring Ukraine and to find political will to resolve this conflict peacefully and to take necessary actions. Russia is a part of this conflict, not a mediator. It has signed Minsk agreements and Normandy summit decisions, and therefore shares responsibility in implementing them. In November 2020, we again saw, unfortunately, a renewal of active hostilities in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone. We deeply regret the high number of causalities it resulted, both among the military personnel and civil population. We call on the sides to respect the ceasefire so that extremely serious humanitarian situation on the ground could be addressed. However, it is worth mentioning that the ceasefire agreement of November 9, 2020 ended the active phase of hostilities, but not the conflict itself. Any lasting political solution to it is only possible with the participation of the OSCE Minsk group, not just one of its members. I wish to extend our full support to the OSCE Minsk group and its co-chairs. Both sides have accused each other of war crimes due to the indiscriminate attacks on civilian neighborhoods, the mistreatment of prisoners of war. We urge those responsible to investigate such matters, adhere to the obligations enshrined in the ceasefire agreement, and encourage the swift return of internally displaced persons and refugees. I'm therefore pleased to report that the newly appointed OEC Parliamentary Assembly Special Representative for South Caucasus, Mr. Bushati, has already begun consultations with a delegation from Azerbaijan and Armenia with an aim of promoting reconciliation and rehabilitation. In Georgia, occupation of a significant part of its territory continues. Instead of implementing its commitments under EU-mediated ceasefire agreement of August 2008, Russia continues to neglect its role in this conflict and its resolution. Moreover, at the same time, it even increases its efforts in integrating the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region to its political, military, and socio-economic system. So-called borderization continues. Civilian movement across the administrative boundary line remains severely restricted. Human rights of the people living in the temporary occupied regions of Georgia seriously violated. However, let me draw your attention to the landmark decision of European Court of Human Rights, January 21 of this year. It underlines Russia's responsibility for the gross human rights violations during and after its war with Georgia. The decisions inter alia legally confirms Georgia's territories as under Russia's occupation. We call on Russia to implement this court's decision without further delay and in a good faith. Besides unresolved conflicts, we also saw unprecedented repressions against political opponents, independent media, human rights defenders, and peaceful protesters in some OSCE participating states. In this regard, the most vivid example is Belarus. We express our concern at the findings of Professor Benedict's report, prepared in response to grave human rights violations related to the forged presidential elections on August 9, 2020. We once again call on Belarusian authorities to implement all recommendations of this report and to comply with OSCE commitments and international human rights standards. The solution of this crisis is only possible through inclusive national dialogue. We also should not forget the poisoning, subsequent detention and sentencing of Mr. Navalny, as well as the brutal attacks against the peaceful protesters in many cities of Russia. We join our international partners in their call to immediate release Mr. Navalny and to ensure the right for peaceful assembly, as well as the right of opinion and media freedom in Russia. Let me also express our serious concern with the most recent detention of the leader of one of the leading opposition parties in Georgia. However, I trust the appropriate solution will be found very soon. On top of this, we are confronted with the new challenges, first and foremost related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Alarmingly, certain states and politicians have endeavored to abuse the state of emergency following the spread of the virus to weaken parliamentary control, to tighten their grip on free independent media, or to suppress their political opponents. Pandemic also revealed how dependent we are on technologies and how quickly various actors try to abuse it. Cyber attacks is no longer terra incognita for us. Much in this field is yet to be regulated, whereas rules surrounding the physical use of force and state responsibility have been entrenched in the international legal order for decades. This is not the case for cyber attacks. Questions surrounding, for example, the issues of attribution are pending final settlement. OSCE and its structures, including OSCE-PA, should pay much more attention to hybrid threats, which have already become an integral part of our national threat perceptions. Disinformation, meddling into our elections and our democratic processes, cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, the use of nerve agents, which are chemical weapons for political assassinations on our streets, are just few examples of this. Finally, let me also underline what the last year military transparency was further declined as a consequence of the failure to modernize the Vienna document. Small arms and light weapons remain the dominant cause of deaths in OSCE area, also when it comes to the threat of terrorism. We as parliamentarians must demand more concerted and resolute action by our governments so what to prevent further tragedies. Dear colleagues, we shall always remind ourselves what the OSCE was founded for and what are our guiding principles. It is my firm conviction what if our predecessors were able to overcome far greater divisions and find common ground, so can we. After all, we must not forget that in moment of crisis, it is our role as parliamentarians to defend the rights of our citizens, to hold governments to account, and most crucially, to promote the spirit of multilateralism. Only if we can act together in this way, we will ever attain the ideal of comprehensive security. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kashunas. That was a very interesting report, very excellent report. Look forward to seeing the final product. But thank you for that. Colleagues, those of you who are on the list for our general debate will, I'm sure, have views on the rapporteur's presentation, and we look forward to hearing them under agenda item number 8. As we move to the 4th item on our agenda, I just want to remind everyone that in the interest of time, the Secretariat has circulated biographies for each of our very distinguished speakers, so that rather than having to listen to me introduce them at length, you can hear directly from them right away, and that gives more time for your interventions that follow. I want to welcome our first presenter, Ambassador Neil Bush, the permanent representative of the United Kingdom to the OSCE, who serves as the current chairperson of the Security Committee of the OSCE Permanent Council. I understand the Security Committee's priorities this year will include crucial issues facing all our countries, such as cybersecurity, violent extremism, and organized crime. We're looking forward to your presentation and to being good partners with you as we work together to address these many challenges. Ambassador, thank you for being with us today. You have the screen.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Chair. I'm honored to have been invited to address this committee for the 2nd time as Chair of the Security Committee. I remain grateful to the Swedish chairpersonship for putting its faith in me to continue in this role, implementing its priorities in the field of transnational threats. It's important that OSCE priorities and commitments in all areas are realized and implemented in partnership with parliamentarians. In my view, parliamentarians serve three key functions: as enablers to shape national policy, as controllers providing legislative oversight, and as bridge builders, bringing together diverging views at all levels, including through meetings such as this one. I acknowledge specifically the role of the Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism, and I was honored to have spoken last June at its 7th meeting and look forward to continuing to engage with its expertise this year. As many of you know, the Security Committee had in recent years not been able to achieve consensus on deliverables at the OSCE Ministerial Council. Fortunately, this changed last year in Tirana. I'm pleased we were able to reach consensus on a declaration on strengthening cooperation in countering transnational organized crime in the OSCE area. Transnational organized crime remains a priority of the Swedish chair in office. As a committee, our meetings on this topic seek to operationalize the Tirana Declaration in key strategic areas. Across all transnational threats, there is also a priority to implement existing commitments. According to the World Bank, the value of transnational criminal networks engaged in various manifestations of organized crime is growing and exceeded $1.3 trillion by 2018, equivalent to around 1.5% of global GDP. It's particularly important to break the social, situational, psychological, and economic drivers of recruitment and ensure that our institutions fighting transnational organized crime continue to be effective, accountable, and free of corruption. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, affects this threat. After some initial disruption to their operations, transnational organized crime groups are benefiting from the ongoing crisis by exploiting or exacerbating long-term or structural vulnerabilities. This makes preventing the scourge even more important. Our work in the committee will also include the issues of counter-terrorism and countering violent extremism. This threat has sadly not diminished. Last year saw appalling terrorist attacks and loss of life in the OSCE area, including here in Vienna. As we've seen, the pandemic has provided another febrile atmosphere for terrorists and violent extremists to thrive, including those on the far right. Our committee will also focus on cybersecurity. Malicious cyber activity causes economic loss, individual suffering, and poses a national security threat to our countries. The last year has forced all of us to rely even more heavily on digital technologies for nearly all aspects of our lives. This has brought the cyber skills gap and cybersecurity itself into much sharper focus. Serious organized crime, terrorism, and cyber attacks pose a threat to our collective and individual security. They also undermine and pose a direct threat to democracy, democratic principles, and our democratic institutions. None of our countries are immune. In the delivery of our Security Committee program, I aim for an inclusive, dynamic, and depoliticized debate, with more discussion and interaction with and between experts to explore the technical issues in detail. I will mainstream gender considerations as well as human rights and fundamental freedoms. Gender dynamics are part of the transnational threat ecosystem. We need to challenge our assumptions and calibrate our responses. For example, women can be victims of terrorism and organized crime, but they can also be perpetrators, facilitators, and serve in the same roles as men. We can also only effectively combat these threats in full compliance with our human rights commitments. The voices and experience of civil society add value here, including to hold governments to account. I will ensure their voices are heard in the committee. I will also continue to fully involve the OSCE field missions in our meetings to help bridge the gap between the work here in Vienna and activity on the ground. I'm hopeful we will this year meet the ambition for the committee to visit an OSCE field mission. To conclude, I continue to believe in the potential of the Security Committee as an effective forum for states to share best practice and work together to implement our shared commitments. And I look forward to working together with the Oec Parliamentary Assembly in combating transnational threats in the OSCE area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bush, for outlining the many challenges we face and the important work of the OSCE Security Committee. I particularly appreciate you mentioning the role of civil society. Now, colleagues, I want to turn to our next speaker. I'm especially glad today to welcome Ambassador Phillip Reeker, Acting Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs Bureau from the Department of State here in Washington, D.C. Colleagues, you may know that the United States currently holds the chairmanship of the Forum for Security Cooperation, known as the FSC, and it is in that capacity that we've asked Ambassador Reeker to speak to the committee. Ambassador, it's my understanding the FSC is addressing a whole range of topics, including the crucial issue of promoting military transparency and predictability across the OSCE space. And I look forward to your remarks. But before you begin, I want to make sure to note for my fellow committee members that your colleague and the senior U.S. official at OSCE in Vienna, Charge d'Affaires Courtney Austrian, is also with us today. And I'd like to warmly welcome her as well. Ambassador Reeker, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Representative Hudson, for the kind introduction and for the work you're doing with OSCE. We in the State Department applaud this and thank you very much. And I want to thank also Courtney Austrian and her great team at our mission there at OSCE. I truly appreciate the invitation by Secretary General Montella to address this distinguished group of speakers and participants. The Parliamentary Assembly of OSCE plays an irreplaceable role in fostering interparliamentary dialogue, supporting implementation of OSCE commitments and building a more secure, prosperous, and democratic OSCE region. And I've seen that firsthand in almost 30 years of diplomatic work, most of it in the OSCE region. I really welcome the chance to speak with you on the chairmanship of the Forum for Security Cooperation, as Congressman Hudson mentioned. The FSC serves as a negotiating and consultative body on political military issues to build confidence, enhance cooperative security, and reduce the risk of conflict in the OSCE area. And much has changed in the European security environment since the last time the USA held the chair of the FSC nearly 18 years ago. And while our priorities, like modernizing the Vienna document and addressing threats like proliferation of small arms and light weapons, while those priorities have remained the same for decades, the political climate has changed, and definitely not for the better. Russia's continuing aggression in Ukraine is the most egregious violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity within the OSCE region. Its flagrant disregard for international law and the OSCE's foundational principles have caused a broad deterioration of the European security environment. That erosion of Europe's security environment, especially since 2014, is the biggest challenge we face today in the organization and in the Forum for Security Cooperation in particular. So I think we have to ask ourselves how we can change that trajectory. Rebuilding military transparency and confidence would be a very good first step. It's a primary focus of the US chairmanship of the FSC. The Vienna document promotes trust and predictability through transparency and verification measures covering armed forces and major equipment systems. Insisting on the full implementation of and updating of the Vienna document has been the FSC's primary contribution to confidence building and military transparency in Europe. And yet, participating states still rely on the Vienna document's 2011 iteration, a whole decade ago, which does not reflect current security challenges. It's time for us to deal with this. 34 participating states have co-sponsored a comprehensive proposal for an update. At the last Ministerial Council, 45 participating states subscribed to a joint statement calling for the modernization of the Vienna document in 2021. It's clear that the vast majority of participating states are committed to enhancing military transparency and wish to embark on a negotiation process to achieve that. This is the year to do it. So why is this process blocked? The main objection voiced has nothing to do with the Vienna document as a confidence building tool, but rather that more confidence building and transparency should not be negotiated until NATO unilaterally reduces its deterrence and defense posture. The first regional security dialogue hosted by the United States as FSC chair focused on NATO's enhanced forward presence, or EFP. So participating states could discuss its goals and respond directly to any concerns about it. We examined the history, the evolution, the current status, and the future plans of EFP, as well as its net contribution to European security, to dispel any misunderstandings about its entirely defensive nature. A key message emerged from this discussion. EFP poses no threat to any other participating state and presents no impediment to modernizing the Vienna document. As we discussed in a subsequent security dialogue, unblocking the process of Vienna document modernization will enhance military transparency and reduce risks emanating from large snap exercises and unusual military activities. The high-level military doctrine seminar held on February 9th and 10th has been a highlight of our FSC chair. This event, which takes place every 5 years, provided a platform for military-to-military dialogue among more than 350 senior military and security officials, with flag officers from nearly all of the participating states in attendance. As I know from my time as the civilian deputy commander at US European Command in Stuttgart, doctrine does not evolve in a geostrategic vacuum. It derives from changes in threat perceptions and emerging security challenges, and it has a direct impact on regional defense planning and armed forces structures. Working sessions explored the 4 C's of military doctrine, conventional deterrence, competition, cooperation, and crisis management. The session on competition was likely the most cogent discussion of below threshold conflict in the OSCE to date, and hybrid threats were a dominant theme throughout the high-level seminar. During our chair, we have also examined the threat posed by man-portable air defense systems. Many participating states agreed on the need for a new best practices guide, recognizing the threat posed by the use of manpads by non-state actors and acknowledging the vital role that OSCE and other organizations play in monitoring and implementing transparency and verification practices. We also dedicated a security dialogue to examine the scale and scope of explosive hazards in Central Asia and the OSCE's instrumental role to mitigate them and combat proliferation. We look forward to the joint FSC Permanent Council session on implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security on the occasion of International Women's Day. This will be a great joint session to focus on proposals for implementing UNSCR 1325 in the FSC's work. Looking ahead, we welcome the continued discussion of confidence building amid strategic ambiguity. The goal of this security dialogue is to assess a range of new security challenges. There's no denying competition employing all elements of national power has a direct impact on political, military aspects of our security. And our military leaders have made clear at the high-level military doctrine seminar that ambiguity about strategic intentions undermines confidence. The US chair of the Forum for Security Cooperation demonstrates our national commitment to military risk reduction and to OSCE's multidimensional approach to security. Through these dialogues, we hope to make progress on this complex array of issues and secure tangible commitments to rebuild confidence and enhance military transparency. We hope you will also consider these topics as you prepare your draft resolution for the Parliamentary Assembly's annual session. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you today, and let me express again my appreciation to all the members of the Parliamentary Assembly for your commitment to the organization and to strengthening regional security. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Reeker. I understand that urgent business is likely to pull you away from our meeting, but we appreciate your joining us today and really look forward to staying in touch with you. We'll make sure that any points made during the open debate that pertain to your presentation are communicated back to you. So look forward to staying in touch. Thank you, Ambassador. All All right, our next speaker is Ambassador Abdrakhmanov, who is appointed to the extremely important position of OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities at the OSCE Ministerial Council last year. As a practitioner of conflict prevention diplomacy, he may be the only OSCE official whose success is measured by what doesn't happen rather than by what does. Ambassador, let me once again congratulate you on your recent appointment. I'm eager to hear more about how you intend to lead this crucial function on behalf of the OSCE and about what you think are the most pressing concerns and risks of conflict due tensions involving national minorities within the OSCE area today. Ambassador, it's my pleasure to welcome you. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the Parliamentary Assembly. It is an honor for me here today and to have the opportunity to address you for the first time as High Commissioner on National Minorities. I have been enjoying excellent relations and partnership with the members of the Parliamentary Assembly since early days of my engagement with the OEC agenda. I value personal friendship with many of you. First of all, I would like to congratulate Peter Lord Bowness for taking over as President of the OEC Parliamentary Assembly. I wish Mr. President and his team the best of success in conducting this very much important work. I was deeply honored to be appointed as a High Commissioner on Tirana Ministerial. As you know, the High Commissioner is mandated to provide early warning and early action to prevent ethnic tensions from developing into conflict. Over the years, successive High Commissioners assisted the OEC participating states in developing and implementing policies that facilitate the integration of diverse societies. At the time when diversity in our societies has increased, promoting policies that facilitate integration is one of the most effective tools for preventing conflicts. How states choose to handle diversity can determine how strong and resilient societies and their peoples are to internal and external threats. The security of each participating state is inseparably linked to that of each person living there. Since taking up my mandate, I have enjoyed the opportunity of engaging with a number of participating states. In my conversations, I highlighted the importance of depoliticizing minority matters, both domestically and in bilateral relations, to help create an environment that is conducive to finding solutions suitable for all, including for persons belonging to national minorities. To that end, I offer support to develop policies that promote integrated and cohesive societies, which is, in the experience of successive High Commissioners, a powerful structural and long-term conflict prevention tool, and hence one of the main pillars guiding my work in the OEC region. In this connection, I would like to support the initiative of the OEC Parliamentary Assembly with the call for action to promote trust and confidence in the OEC. I wish in particular express my respect for the efforts of my distinguished predecessor, former Secretary General and High Commissioner, Honorable Ambassador Lamberto Zanier, for his tireless efforts. In my day-to-day work, I focus on short-term actions that can help reduce tensions and provide legal and policy advice to promote sustainable and longer-term integration of diverse societies. My office also implements targeted programs in a number of participating states. A very important characteristic of my mandate is to work in confidence and act independently of all parties directly involved, both within and between participating states. As you are aware, I am the High Commissioner on National Minorities, not the High Commissioner for National Minorities. And the main reference for support to participating states is a series of recommendations and guidelines that the successive High Commissioners have published in a number of specific sectorial areas over the past 3 decades. And that these documents range from overview of the policies needed to promote the overall process of integration or the challenges of looking at national minority issues from the perspective of interstate relations, to others which address more specific angles, such as education, language, participation, media, policing in multi-ethnic societies, or access to justice and media in the digital age. I take this opportunity also to draw your kind attention to the High Commissioner's 2020's recommendations on COVID-19 measures to support social cohesion. Distinguished participants, from the perspective of above-mentioned documents, may I remind you that the effective participation and representation of persons belonging to national minorities in public life is an indicative of their level of inclusion in societies as a whole. A balanced approach to education and language in diverse societies is a prerequisite and starting point for ensuring the participation and representation of all members of society, taking into account their own specific identities. At the same time, each and every participating states has accumulated quite a wealth of positive experience, and many participating states have know-how on how to tackle sensitive minority issues. I will do my part to assist participating states in exchanging best practices and strengthen trust between them and within their societies. Ladies and gentlemen, cooperation with the Oec Parliamentary Assembly is very important for the implementation of my mandate. Recent examples of good cooperation include the participation of former Oec Parliamentary Assembly's President, Mr. Tsereteli, and 2 members of the Parliamentary Assembly in high-level event in Moldova on questions related to the autonomy with parliamentarians from Chisinau and Gagauzia. In October last year, my office organized a successful event with the US Helsinki Commission and with the participation of Senator Ben Cardin on policing in diverse societies. And I will seek to engage more during my upcoming visits to countries with members of national parliaments to discuss legislative process that may affect national minorities. I would like also to add that sustainable development is a cornerstone of security in the 21st century, and that we should find ways to align our work to the benefits of our citizens, more to the implementation of the SDGs, which endorsed under the aegis of the United Nations in 2015. Distinguished members of the Parliamentary Assembly, 10 years ago at the OEC summit in Nur-Sultan, we signed a Astana commemorative declaration. And we recommitted to the vision of a free, democratic, common, and indivisible Euro-Atlantic and Eurasian security community stretching from Vancouver to Vladivostok, rooted in agreed principles, shared commitments, and common goals. I remind you that Parliamentary Assembly and its leadership played a crucial role in convening first and so far the last OEC summit in the 21st century. Our leaders in Nur-Sultan recognized the need to meet and demonstrate the highest possible level of their commitment to multilateral cooperation. At the same time, our leaders acknowledged that more must be done in all 3 dimensions of the OEC to make the Euro-Atlantic and Eurasia into a shared area of peace based on common values, trust, traditions, transparency, and tolerance. 10 years later, many of the threats identified in the Astana Declaration continue to need our urgent attention. In my view, it is essential that we reinforce our efforts to build trust between participating states and within participating states. I look very much forward to engaging with you, distinguished members of the Parliamentary Assembly, and working towards these goals. I thank you for inviting me to this forum, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for being here, for the important work you do. On a personal note, thank you for the work you've done working very closely with our U.S. delegation. In a recent hearing we had here, we believe in your work and we believe in your institution. Colleagues, before I go to the next speaker, I did want to acknowledge our President, Lord Bonus, is with us, and we certainly appreciate your leadership and appreciate you being here for our committee. I know you've got a lot of work, you may be in and out, but we sure appreciate you being here, Mr. President. So now our last speaker, Ambassador Chevik, the Chief Monitor of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Ambassador, some of our members will have heard your excellent presentation at our online parliamentary dialogue on COVID's impact on conflicts in the OSCE region in May. As I hope you clearly understood on that occasion, the OSCE SMM is held in the highest regard by our Assembly, and we're all grateful for the work done by SMM teams and often very difficult conditions. Ambassador, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Esteemed members of the Parliamentary Assembly, I would like to thank you for inviting me today for an update on the work of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission and on the security situation in Ukraine. I believe we are at an important crossroads. Unique developments since the summer have provided a window of opportunity to reach a sustainable ceasefire and meaningful progress on other tracks. But this window is narrowing. While the SMM will do all it can to support processes on the ground, it is up to the sides to take clear steps to ensure this opportunity is seized. During my intervention, I will focus on the following issues. First, the security situation and its impact on civilians in eastern Ukraine, including increasing concern about the separation of communities. Second, the dynamics and developments in the working group on security issues of the Trilateral Contact Group, where positions are becoming increasingly entrenched. Third, the freedom of movement of the mission, which continues to be impeded overwhelmingly in non-government controlled areas. Ladies and gentlemen, following the agreement reached by the sides on the additional measures to strengthen the ceasefire in July last year, the SMM has observed a much improved situation on the ground. Currently, the ceasefire violations are on average 1/6 of the level observed before the agreement. Other important indicators of the security situation, such as the number of civilian casualties caused by shelling and damage to civilian infrastructure, also remain much lower than they were. For example, since 27th of July, the mission has corroborated 3 civilian casualties from shelling, compared to 53 from January to July 27. Although it is 3 too many, we have to acknowledge the drop in the numbers. However, this progress is fragile. In recent months, we have seen a gradual increase in ceasefire violations and more frequent allegations of violations shared by the sides. These developments were accompanied by escalating rhetoric during the negotiations and in the media, which are particularly destabilizing given their potential to lead a broader escalation. Ladies and gentlemen, while an overall improved security situation has benefited civilians, this has unfortunately been offset by the challenges brought by the pandemic and the persistence of other security challenges. Although civilian casualties from shelling are down, the number of killed and injured from unexploded ordnance and other explosive devices has actually increased since 27th of July. Boys and men account for the majority of the civilian casualties in this category. Restrictions on freedom of movement of civilians, including those imposed in the context of the pandemic, have further compounded difficulties for people and families, especially for women. Since March 2020, civilians have only been able to cross between government and non-government controlled areas of Ukraine at 2 of the 5 official crossing points. And one of them is partially open only twice a week, for that matter. Between March and December 2020, crossings are down to 92% compared with the last previous year, according to figures provided by the Ukrainian Border Guard Service. Despite an agreement in principle to open new entry-exit checkpoints in Shastia and Zolote, disagreements over the modalities for their operation continue to prevent their use by civilians. The continued limits put on people's ability to cross the contact line not only separate families and affect livelihoods, but also divide the communities with potential long-term consequences. Under such daily challenges, ensuring the continued operation of civilian infrastructure sites is of paramount importance. In this respect, the SMM has prioritized its support for localized ceasefires to enable repair and maintenance in such sites. Last year, these activities facilitated repairs to nearly 120 gas, water, and electricity infrastructure objects, benefiting 6 million civilians. Ladies and gentlemen, greater tensions on the ground have coincided with an increasingly intractable impasse during the negotiations in the working group on security issues of the Trilateral Contact Group. While the sides reached promising in-principle agreements over the summer on an updated mine action plan and 4 new disengagement areas, these have yet to be finalized. If implemented, they would be key steps for progress as important aspects of the security-related provisions of the Normandy 4 Paris Summit. The key impediment so far has been the attempts to link progress to political issues outside the remit of the working group. Another point of impasse has been the inability of the sides to agree on details for implementation of a coordination mechanism to follow up on alleged breaches of the agreed measures, with a view both to de-escalating tensions on the ground and to addressing impunity. The mechanism could serve as an important confidence-building measure and reinforce the ceasefire if used as intended. In view of the lack of progress on this issue, I have repeatedly urged the sides to take action against impunity, starting by unilaterally addressing violations corroborated in SMM reports. Unfortunately, these calls have yet to be acted upon. Dear members of the Assembly, SMM freedom of movement, which is enshrined in mission's mandate and Minsk agreements, is essential to be able to continue serving as the eyes and ears of the international community in Ukraine. And yet violations in this respect continue on a regular basis. More than 95% of all freedom of movement restrictions experienced by SMM in 2020 took place in non-government controlled areas. Restrictions imposed on the mission by the armed formations in the context of COVID pandemic at checkpoints, along with official crossing routes, have added additional challenges to the existing problems. These have affected the mission's resource efficiencies and limited the number of patrols available in non-government controlled areas. The mission has compensated by increasingly relying on its technical means, but even these are obstructed by incidents of jamming and targeted fire, which take place on both sides of the contact line. Ladies and gentlemen, before concluding my remarks, I would like to underline that the political will is essential to maintain an improved security situation and to create necessary conditions for further developments. Currently, the sides have entrenched themselves in political positions which have made advancing important technical issues difficult. But as I am still hopeful that there remains a window for pragmatic solutions and that the sides can build on success achieved. From the SMM sides, we will continue to work hand in hand with the chair and the secretariat, as well as with the OEC executive structures and institutions, to contribute to tangible progress for the benefit of civilians on the ground. The Oec Parliamentary Assembly's role is also important in contributing to these conflict resolution efforts. However, in the end, it's up to the sides to demonstrate their will and commitment by taking clear and practical steps. As they do, they will find the full support of the mission. And finally, distinguished members, I look forward for future cooperation in SMM's endeavor to fulfill its tasks to the Assembly, Oec Parliamentary Assembly, and express SMM teams, including myself, the gratitude for the continuous support that we are receiving from this august body. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and you do have the full support of this organization. We appreciate the work of our SMMs in general, yours in particular. Thank you for this very important work under very, very difficult situations. Colleagues, we're now on agenda item number 8, the open general debate. We look forward to hearing your views on the presentations you've heard today and on the issues before the committee. As I told you at the outset, it is a priority for me to give you as much time to express yourselves. And because of that, we are going to actually, instead of 3 minutes, as we announced earlier, because we've had so much interest, I'm going to ask your indulgence that we limit our speeches to 2 minutes. And I would again just ask everyone to please, out of respect to your colleagues, stick to the 2 minutes. You will see the timer on your screen. Please adhere to that 2 minutes so that as many of our colleagues as wish to will be able to intervene. As I mentioned also at the beginning, given the nature of this online meeting, I've asked the Assembly's Deputy Secretary General, Gustavo Pilares, to moderate this part of the meeting on my behalf. So Gustavo, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We have a total of 24 members of the committee that have asked for the floor to speak in this open debate. And as you have mentioned, we have limited the time to 2 minutes. Please follow the time on your monitors. And we also have 3 other speakers that will be given the floor. That these are the speakers that did not have the opportunity to speak at the joint session. They will come at the end. With that said, the open general debate is now open, and I ask the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Dunava from Romania, to open the debate. Mr. Dunava, please.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you, Mr. Kaciunas, for your detailed report, and Ambassador Bash, Ambassador Reeker, Ambassador Abramos, Ambassador Cevic, for your comprehensive and very interesting presentations. Dear colleagues, I am sure I am not the only one upon whom these interventions impress the magnitude of the problems faced by the OSCE participating states today. The COVID-19 pandemic is an all-encompassing challenge, touching every aspect of our constituent lives. It has created the difficulties where previously there were none, and enhanced tensions that existed long before. One area where this holds true is that of regional security. I deeply regret the recent clashes in the Nagorno-Karabakh, the persistence of fighting in eastern Ukraine, and the unresolved territorial disputes in Georgia and Moldova. When we met last May to discuss COVID-19's impact on conflicts in the OSCE region, we all agreed to do our best not to let this crisis affect the welfare of civilians or endeavors to obtain lasting peace. However, with the passage of time, we have seen such ambitions falter and fail. Now we must require stronger political will and legislative accountability in order to see these commitments fully released. It must be the priority of each and all of us to strive to elevate the suffering of the people we were elected to serve. As Mr. Kaciunas rightly noted, this kind of parliamentary engagement is especially pressing given the emergence of new technologies, which could significantly enhance the scale of damage incurred in any military hostilities. Proper control and communication in the cybersphere remains of the utmost importance. Therefore, we must encourage our governments to support the OSCE's efforts in the field to diminish the risk of confrontation. But other unforeseen dangers will inevitably continue to appear. I am convinced that the only way to properly address such developments is to address them together. This is why I am pleased that the theme and focus for the next annual session will address the urgent need to reinforce multilateralism in times of global crisis, providing a parliamentary call for future action. In the past year alone, we have all been tested by problems which none of us could overcome alone. As we embark on the arduous task of dealing with the devastating consequences of one of the worst pandemics in history and its broad ramifications for our citizens' health, income, and most crucially, security, we must be able to rely on the help of our partners. After all, this is the spirit of the Helsinki Final Act, which must live on in all of us today. Dear colleagues, I thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing from each of you during this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dunaba. We understand that Senator Reeker from the US will be joining us shortly, so we move to the third speaker on the list, Ms. Marcadetra Sederfeld from Sweden, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I would also say thank you, dear colleagues, and thank you to the speakers. I have appreciated their remarks very much. It shows on the importance of the Parliamentary Assembly. It shows the importance of the democratic pathway forward. I think here about the documents of Helsinki Final Act, the Paris Charter, the Astana Declaration, and I must underline that I am very pleased to see that it's also the inclusiveness when it comes to the leadership of the OSCE institutions, and that Central Asia is included in the leadership. When we talk about today's situation in OSCE, there is challenges. There are threats to the peaceful solution forward. And I think here about democracy, and I'm speaking about particular in Belarus. Those of us who have followed the pathway forward from the 9th of August 2020, when it was the presidential election, have noticed all the peaceful demonstrations, people who are going out on the streets because they want democracy. But what have happened? They have been arrested, they have been beaten up, there have been couched, even youngsters as old as 15, 16 years old for 5 to 6 years in jail. This is not proper. This is not a democratic way to handle the situation. And I would really like to say that President Lukashenko have still the possibility to initiate a democratization process, and that would be the best gift for the Belarusian people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Vice President Guliev, Azerbaijan, please.
Thank you very much, dear Gustavo, dear Mr. Chair. I would like to briefly inform you that along with other issues, Azerbaijan now is facing 3 major challenging issues regarding the post-conflict period. The first one is the deminding of conflict-affected areas. Regretfully, since the signing of the trilateral statement, 16 Azerbaijani citizens, including 10 civilians, were killed, 66 citizens were heavily wounded. It is of particular concern that Armenia refuses to submit the maps of mine areas to Azerbaijan as stipulated under the international humanitarian law to save human lives and accelerate post-conflict rebuilding. The second issue is the punishment of the perpetrators of the war crimes against Azerbaijani civilians by Armenia. My conviction is that all perpetrators of war crimes, regardless of their nationalities, must be brought to justice. Azerbaijan, in full understanding of its commitments under the international humanitarian law, has analyzed the relevant media footage which allegedly depicted the inhuman behavior of the Azerbaijani servicemen against the Armenian war prisoners and launched relevant criminal investigations. But unfortunately, despite the presence of undeniable evidence and media reports, we do not see the same approach from Armenian side to launch the criminal investigation concerning the war crimes committed by the servicemen against Azerbaijanis. The third issue that I wanted to touch upon this issue, which is about the role of the Minsk Group co-chairing countries, that we were also in previous discussions discussed about that issue. I do believe that the OEC Minsk Group co-chairing country can be instrumental in mediating the submission of the map of minefields by Armenia to Azerbaijan. Secondly, the co-chairing states should provide their assistance to post-conflict rehabilitation and reconstruction efforts implemented in the recently liberated lands of the Republic of Azerbaijan. The last one is, of course, I do believe that the Minsk Group co-chairing countries should promote and directly support the full implementation of trilateral statements and come up with the relevant proposals adequate to the realities on the ground. No outdated and obsolete ideas are acceptable. Minsk Group can also promote restoration, the trust and confidence between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. The floor now to Ms. Irene Karalambides from Cyprus, please.
Thank you. We very much welcome recent signals by major global powers of their renewed engagement and support to multilateralism, both in terms of their participation in international organizations and their return to significant international treaties. With regard to Cyprus, while the United Nations Secretary General has announced an informal 5-party conference on the Cyprus problem next April with the participation of the leaders of the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities and the 3 guarantor powers, Greece, Turkey, and the United Kingdom, Turkey has been advocating a 2-state solution. This is unacceptable and not to the benefit of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, who will be the 2 communities that will have to work to render the solution viable. Therefore, the solution to be reached must serve the interests of the Cypriot people, not third parties like Turkey. Additionally, the EU has made it clear that a 2-state solution is not acceptable and that the solution must be in line with relevant Security Council resolutions, the United Nations Charter, EU law values and principles. A word on the current pandemic. COVID continues to have a profound impact on health, our economies, and our democracies. European citizens expected a speedy EU vaccine strategy imbued with more solidarity against vaccine nationalism and popularism. The only way to back to normality is to speed vaccinations program. In the EU, the rollout up to now has been disappointing. Additionally, continuing restrictive measures need to be closely scrutinized. The United Nations Secretary General has recently criticized governments that use the virus as a pretext to crush decent and unnecessarily curtail freedoms. It is sadly observed that this pandemic has also been utilized in order to distract attention away from internal problems as well as from corruption scandals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor goes to the head of the Georgian delegation, Mikolos Karadze, please.
Mr. Chairperson, distinguished colleagues, I would like to start my address by stressing the fact that today Georgia marks the 100th anniversary of the Red Army's invasion of our country. Today we honor the memory of our heroes who sacrificed their lives for the independence of our homeland. Exactly a century has passed since the brutal invasion by Soviet Russia, and what is worrisome is that Russia's inclination towards expansion has not changed a century later. We are extremely concerned with Russia's growing military presence and projecting power in the South Caucasus and Black Sea region against the backdrop of changing power balance after the Nagorno-Karabakh war, and express great concern that in parallel, Moscow has intensified the annexation process of Georgia's occupied territory and continues provocations amid coronavirus crisis, seriously destabilizing the situation on the ground. The region undoubtedly harbors risks of further confrontations. The continuous occupation is an unpleasant reminder that Russia is far from willing the promotion of peace and prosperity of states in its southern neighborhood. With that said, I would like to mention the unprecedented international legal victory of Georgia against Russia in the European Court of Human Rights that has delivered historical judgment confirming that Russia's occupation and effective control over occupied regions of Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region, Russia's responsibility for killing, torture, ill treatment, looting and burning of houses, for deprivation of right of internally displaced persons and refugees to return to their homes. It is of utmost importance that the international community gives due consideration to this ECHR judgment and effectively uses this legal instrument to push Russia to stop its illegal occupation and administrative practice of human rights violations. I believe the democracies should stand together to counter Russia's aggressive stance in the region for the sake of our common values and principles and for the sake of European security. I would like to also draw your attention to worrying trend of increasing volume of fake news and propaganda. Fake news is one of the tools of hybrid warfare, which aims at undermining trust of the society in democratic institutions. Furthermore, this is a tool to cause polarization in the society and thus threaten the foundations of democracy and statehood. I would also like to address Mr. Kashunas. He expressed concern over the arrest of Mr. Melia, but I have to say that nobody can or be above the law for the role of politician, because anyone who sees that publicly defying law, publicly throwing away the electronic monitoring bracelet is something which cannot be tolerated. Mr. Melia still can pay the bail and he will be released immediately. So this is an unfortunate incident, but he still has all instruments in his hand to be free again. He just needs to be paid the bail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now recognize the head of the delegation of Switzerland, Mr. Joseph Dietli, please.
Ja, Herr Vorsitzender, geschätzte Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Ich möchte mich zur Lage in der Ukraine äußern und damit anknüpfen an die interessanten Ausführungen von Herrn Botschafter Yazir Aleksejevic. Die humanitäre Lage in der Ostukraine ist generell weiterhin schwierig und sehr anspruchsvoll. Behinderungen des freien Personenverkehrs, wiederholte Verletzungen von Waffenstillstandsabkommen und der fortgesetzte Einsatz von Antipersonenminen und Sprengkörpern bereiten uns große Sorgen. In der Schweiz sicher auch bei Ihnen. Tausende von Zivilisten müssen regelmäßig die Kontaktlinie überqueren, um administrative Angelegenheiten zu erledigen, ihr Rentengeld abzuholen oder sich mit dem täglichen Bedarf einzudecken. Während eigentlich alle 5 Übergangsstellen geöffnet sein sollten, sind es nur 2 davon und diese auch nur teilweise, die in Betrieb sind. Wie schon in den letzten Jahren fordert die Schweizer Delegation die betroffenen Akteure auf, alle diese Übergangsstellen so schnell wie möglich wieder einzurichten und zu betreiben. Die erschreckende Zahl der Toten und Verletzten seit 2014 zeigt die brutale Realität des täglichen Lebens jener Menschen auf, die am nächsten an den Schießereien und Minenfeldern leben. Die diversen Verstöße gegen den Waffenstillstand, die uns immer wieder gemeldet werden, sind unerträglich. Darüber hinaus muss eine verstärkte Minenräumung dringend in Betracht gezogen werden, insbesondere zum Schutz von Kindern, die bekanntermaßen besonders gefährdet sind. Danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you very much. Floor to the head of the Ukrainian delegation, Mr. Puturayev, please.
Mr. Chairperson, dear colleagues, I'd like to reflect a little something that I've heard, and I would maybe advice, I'm sorry, to put some of major part of a lot of questions strictly to our Russian colleagues, to Moscow, not to us, because we showed goodwill for peace for all last years. We showed our possibilities to find compromises. We established new demilitarized zones. We equipped new infrastructure for people from occupied territories. What had we received? New losses, snipers, abandoned by international conventions mines, which they use Russian troops and Russian proxies in this area, not we. So let's ask Russians, I think. Meanwhile, I would like to thank you all OSCE countries for strong support of Ukraine. Especially, we have to thank our US colleagues for sanctions against Nord Stream 2. And I would like to say a few words to our European colleagues. Dear friends, this Nord Stream 2 is not about economical cooperation. It's about support of Russian military machine. This money is not for people in Russia. They are for new tanks, artillery, rocket missiles, and thousands of them are deployed along our borders and on occupied territories. Last year, during winter session, I've talked about militarization of Crimea, including possible nuclear militarization. Last year, I've talked about destroying the industry of Donbas, including stealing equipment and even whole plants and replacing them to Russian Federation, and the possible consequences that can cause serious ecological disaster in the nearest future. I've talked about illegal mass arrests, political terror, and tortures in occupied Crimea and Donbas. If nothing has changed, if anything has changed, nothing. This winter, we're talking about women and gender rights and rising of anti-Semitism. And among members of Russian delegation, we still see a person who was blamed in sexual harassment. Main Russian TV anchor Vladimir Solovyov, who already had advocated Benito Mussolini, last week in his largest TV show in Russian television, has advocated Adolf Hitler, stressing in largest show that Hitler is much more honorable person than Alexei Navalny, a person that was nearly killed by Russian authorities. If it's not scoffing, then I don't know what is to scoff, dear friends. Dear colleagues, I think that civilized world should take a decision, or we put them at their deserved place behind new Iron Curtain that they promise us to build. Remembering Mr. Josep Borrell visit to Moscow, using diplomacy, only diplomacy and new sanctions, or the civilized countries will share the meal with nearly born Moscow Bacchus, considering that this roast beef is made from human meat. I'm sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Let me just remind you that the time allocated for the general debate is 2 minutes per speaker. So I now move to the next on the list, Head of Delegation of Sweden, Mr. Johann, please.
Dear Chairperson, dear members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss some of our shared challenges. The importance of international forums like the OSCE for discussions concerning security, stability, and prosperity has never dissipated. First, one of our most pressing crises is trust in democratic institutions. All over our region, we can observe an increase in the activity of authoritarian movements challenging many of our democratic values. Through fear and violence, these movements are trying to undermine fundamental principles of the democratic state. I was in the United States during the presidential election, feeling directly the tension that had been building up during several years of worrisome developments, and returning home from the observation, I watched in horror the storming of the US Capitolium. One must ask oneself, what are the roots of these movements? What is fueling the distrust and the violence? I believe part of the answer is the growth of inequalities and growing differences between groups, both domestically and globally. To tackle this development, we cannot only address its consequences, we also must address its roots. We need to work against inequality and provide the opportunities needed for people to have the possibility to shape their own lives, and thereby building trust for our institutions and creating a shared sense of optimism for the future. Second, we can also observe that countries where democracy is already under pressure have seen a decline in the freedom of their people, with increases in violence against protesters, abuse of power, and violations of fundamental human rights. In Belarus, the crackdown on protesters has not ceased. I strongly condemn the violence and call on the government to conduct free and fair elections. In Russia, we have seen the imprisonment of the opposition, and I demand that Navalny must be released. Lastly, we must address the ongoing conflicts in the OSCE region, and this is one of our most fundamental tasks. These kinds of forums are crucial to establish the foundation needed for a more secure OSCE region. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We now go back to Washington. Pleasure to recognize the Vice President of the OSCPA, Senator Roger Reeker, former chair of this committee. Senator Reeker, please.
Thank you, and thank you for moving me around on the schedule to accommodate unexpected appointment that I had. I'm pleased to join in this discussion of the committee today. OSCE stands for Comprehensive Security based on respect for human rights, democracy, and fundamental freedoms. And although there are many pressing issues that have been discussed today, this committee must not lose its focus on Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The war in eastern Ukraine has now claimed more than 13,000 lives and has created a dire humanitarian situation. Russia falsely claims to be an impartial mediator in this conflict, even though it is fueling hostilities. Moscow has carried out brutal human rights violations against Crimean Tatars, ethnic Ukrainians, religious minorities, and anyone who opposes Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea. The aggression egregiously violates the Helsinki Final Act, a position adopted by this Parliamentary Assembly. Until this aggression is reversed, we must continue to reiterate the following points. This unprovoked aggression has gone too far. The Russian leadership in Moscow must withdraw all political, military, and financial support for its proxies in eastern Ukraine. Moscow should restore Ukrainian control over its internationally recognized borders. And we call on Moscow to respect Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Our bipartisan delegation from the United States is unanimous that we will never recognize Russia's purported annexation of Crimea. Relevant sanctions will remain in place until this territorial integrity is restored. And of course, the Russian government and its proxies must also cease from hindering OSCE monitors from fulfilling their mandate. Russia's actions in Ukraine are part and parcel to a strategic posture that seeks to undermine regional cooperation and transparency. For example, the Putin regime chooses not to work with OSCE participating states to modernize the Vienna document. Moscow also shuns opportunities to build confidence through dialogue, such as through the recent OSCE high-level military doctrine seminar, which Moscow boycotted. I'm still hopeful for a change in the geopolitical mindset of Russia's leadership. I'm hopeful that freedom and liberty will reign and that the day will come when Russia fulfills its obligations as an OSCE participating state and meets its Helsinki Final Act commitments. Until then, I urge our committee and the Assembly as a whole to remain clear-eyed about Moscow's intention and to act accordingly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Floor goes to the member of delegation from Kazakhstan, Ms. Aygul Kuspan, please.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Speaking at the 70th session of the UN General Assembly, the first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, put forward an initiative to form a global coalition to combat terrorism. We believe that the key to success in countering terrorism lies in the closest coordination of action at the global, regional, and national levels. The stable development of the Central Asian region is a key issue for Kazakhstan. We are convinced that peace and stability in Afghanistan have a direct impact on the security of the entire region. Kazakhstan continues the return of its nationals from Syria. In early February, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, with the support of the United States and other international partners, conducted an operation to return 12 Kazakhstan nationals from Syria back to the country. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that the newly elected Majlis is convinced that parliamentary diplomacy can play an important role in implementing the goals of Kazakhstan's foreign policy. These include strengthening international peace, cooperation, and increasing the effectiveness of global and regional security systems and cooperation. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to Mr. Leonid Slutsky from the Russian Federation, please.
Добрый день, дорогие члены комитета. Я хотел бы поддержать госпожу Ирену Харламбидес, представителя парламента Кипра, в том, что мы также не понимаем бездействия институтов Европейского Союза по сотрудничеству против пандемии COVID-19. Когда на севере Италии погибали люди в Милане, в Бергамо, к сожалению, помощь Европейского Союза не пришла, а оказала ее Российская Федерация, наши вирусологи, наши аппараты искусственной вентиляции легких, которые были направлены, в том числе и Российским фондом мира, который я имею честь возглавлять. Большое спасибо, мы разделяем эту позицию. Что касается выступления господина Потураева, должен, к великому сожалению, констатировать, что все сказанное в отношении моей страны является ложью. Россия не нападала на Южную Осетию. Это сделал режим президента Грузии Саакашвили, который до этого много лет создавал центробежные тенденции. И не просто создавал центробежные тенденции для Южной Осетии, но и грубейшим образом напал Южную Осетию в дни Олимпийского перемирия. Погибли российские миротворцы, старики, дети, женщины. То же самое я хотел бы адресовать и главе грузинской делегации. Ему нужно почитать доклад посла Хайди Тальевини, принятый в 2009 году, который дает нам правду. И что касается выступления сенатора Reeker и того же господина Потураева, совместная мониторинговая миссия ОБСЕ неоднократно зафиксировала, что нет на территории юго-востока Украины оружия, происходящего из России. Давайте прекратим заниматься ложью и обманывать друг друга. Давайте переходить, дорогие коллеги, и в первую очередь в рамках нашего комитета к конструктивному сотрудничеству на основе истины, на основе обмена мнениями по реальной ситуации и на Украине, и в Белоруссии, и где угодно на пространстве ОБСЕ. В противном случае, вместо того, чтобы объединяться, чего требует и пандемия COVID-19, и международный терроризм, и другие новые вызовы и угрозы, в том числе и наркотрафик, исходящий из Афганистана, о чем сказала наша казахстанская коллега, мы будем продолжать обманывать друг друга, навешивать ярлыки и применять санкции, которые давным-давно устарели. Любые санкции и рестрикции должны быть удалены из нашей практики, из практики международных отношений 21-го столетия. Спасибо.
Thank you. Let me now announce that for technical reasons, interpretation will have to stop in 30 minutes. If you wish to speak in the debate in a language other than English, please let us know well in advance. That way non-English statements could be advanced on the speakers list and get interpretations. This will be highly appreciated. Now the floor goes to Mr. Voronetsky from Belarus, please.
Уважаемые коллеги, мне поручено от имени делегации Национального собрания Республики Беларусь проинформировать о том, что белорусская делегация планирует инициировать на предстоящей 29-й ежегодной сессии Парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ в Бухаресте внесение проекта резолюции предотвращения потребления наркотиков среди детей и молодежи. Хотели бы прежде всего отметить актуальность темы, поскольку все страны мира обеспокоены ростом наркомании среди молодежи. Потребление наркотиков наносит серьезный ущерб здоровью, ведет к социальной деградации и становится угрозой жизни. В то же время это оказывает крайне неблагоприятное воздействие на общественное здоровье и безопасность в каждой стране. В этой связи профилактика наркомании и привлечение внимания международной общественности к данной проблеме имеет первостепенное значение для борьбы с ее последствиями. Антинаркотическая проблематика должна оставаться в поле зрения как общего комитета по ОБСЕ по политическим вопросам и безопасности, так и всей организации. Беларусь подтверждает принципиальную линию, направленную на реализацию в рамках международных организаций, объединительных и востребованных всеми государствами инициатив по острым глобальным проблемам. Хотели бы напомнить, что в ходе Минской летней сессии по ОБСЕ Беларусь инициировала резолюцию разработку своевременных и эффективных законодательных, нормативных, административных мер реагирования на появление новых психоактивных веществ, которая была включена в итоговую Минскую декларацию. Таким образом, мы нацелены на продолжение работы над указанной темой. Выражаем надежду на поддержку парламентариями новой белорусской антинаркотической инициативы и приглашаем уважаемых коллег выступить с авторами проекта резолюции, предложенного парламентской делегацией Беларуси. Спасибо.
Thank you. Floor to Mr. Altinok, Turkey, please.
Selami Altın. Sayın Dear Chairperson, dear colleagues, I would like to express my appreciation for this valuable web meeting, which emphasized the importance of combating terrorism situation in and around Ukraine and minorities. First of all, I strongly condemn the terrorist attacks which 16 civilians and security forces were brutally killed by PKK and YPG terrorist organization. As we all know, terrorism threatens everyone, regardless of language, religion, or race, and we can just only overcome these threats in spirit of unity and solidarity. Thus, given the transboundary nature of terrorism, struggling with many terrorist organizations such as PKK and PYD, YPG and ISIS and FETÖ and Asala, Turkey firmly believes in countering these threats in all its forms and manifestations in a cooperative manner. Secondly, I congratulate Mr. Khairat Abdurrahmanov for his new position and thank for his informative presentation. And I would like to also extend my thanks to Chief Monitor Ambassador Yashar Halitchevik for his presentation on the situation in and around Ukraine. The OSCE Special Monitoring Mission led by Ambassador Chevik. I would like to this Greek side of Cyprus is not sharing the wealth and the assets of the Cyprus with the Turkish side, and despite all the constructive negotiations, unfortunately failed because of the Cyprus side, and a new negotiation process will yield no results, and neither the Turkish people and the Cypriot Turks have 50 years to lose. And two people, two democracy, and two states will continue to live there. Therefore, the Greek administration of the Cyprus in 2014, when they rejected Annan plan, they have rejected the solution for two nations and two states. Now, we are negotiating for the sovereignty of the two states. And we are supporting the UN Secretary General's efforts, and we will continue our support to the UN Secretary General's efforts. And lastly, I frankly believe that OSCE and OSCE Parliamentary Assembly are vital platforms in addressing the crisis, as they have political reach-out capacity and provide impartial platforms for dialogue. I'm sure that with our efforts to strengthen these international platforms, they will be helpful in time of crisis and even post-conflict stabilization. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to
Teşekkürler.
President Canada, please. Yes, please, you have the floor.
Canada? Yes?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. I thought there was a previous speaker. Thank you to previous speakers for noting the SDGs and the Security Council suite of resolutions, starting with 1325 in the year 2000 on Women, Peace and Security, or WPS. We must now bring together the 1325 WPS suite with security resolutions on youth, peace and security, with particular attention to young women's leadership in peace building. The future is being shaped now, and we need to understand better the many ways in which young women leaders are on the front lines as resistors of extremism and contributors to stabilizing their families and communities. While the first committee is often focused on interstate relations, we must not forget the impact of our decisions on the well-being and human security of people in our countries. We must ensure that a range of voices reflecting a diversity of life experiences are at the table as decisions are made. We can learn from the campaign for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Civil society actors, including the Nobel Peace Prize laureate International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, were instrumental in advocating for the treaty, which came into force a month ago and now has 86 signatories and 52 state parties. As an independent senator with no political affiliation, I am able to acknowledge with great regret that my country has chosen not to sign this treaty yet. As parliamentarians, we appreciate the importance of training and leadership opportunities for youth. Just one example I witnessed in the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh was where the Global Network of Women Peace Builders Young Women Leaders program brought together young Bangladeshi women to support and teach young Rohingya women, including girls with babies born of rape on their laps in the makeshift classroom. In closing, I note that OSCE PA Special Representative on Gender Issues, the Honorable Hedy Fry, a Canadian, noted the need to integrate the WPS and YPS agendas, including intersectional analysis, incorporating factors such as race, disability, and poverty. I look forward to any comments the speakers may provide concerning the issues I have raised. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor now to the head of the Romanian delegation, Mr. Radu Mihail, please.
Thank you very much. And Your Excellency and dear colleagues, I would like to commend the important work and valuable insights we heard about earlier on the recent developments in and around Ukraine. I would like to reiterate my support for the Minsk agreements, including the observance of the freedom of movement for the members of the Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, guarantees that have been disregarded on many occasions, despite commitments to ensure safe and secure access for the OSCE envoys. The full respect of Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders is a non-negotiable prerequisite for attaining a sustainable political solution to the conflict. Unfortunately, the conflict in Ukraine continues to undermine stability in Europe, as well as the already fragile security environment around the Black Sea, where the protracted conflicts are still on, as the one in Transnistria. There is a need for a comprehensive, peaceful, and sustainable settlement based on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Moldova within its internationally recognized borders and without affecting the country's European path. We have recently witnessed, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, a setback in the process with the crossing points illegally installed by Tiraspol during this period, and a visible deterioration in terms of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the Transnistrian region. We put our hopes in the OSCE 5+2 format, the only one that guarantees the path towards a lasting solution in the settlement process. I also hope that the current Swedish OSCE chairmanship will keep high on its political agenda the peaceful resolution of the Transnistrian conflict and all other protracted conflicts unfolding in the Black Sea region. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the floor to Mr. Zhiavarov from the Russian Federation, please.
Уважаемые коллеги, внимательно прослушал проект доклада господина Лаурина Скальстонца. Там есть очень много конструктивных вещей. Единственное, я ни в докладе, ни в выступлениях последующих не услышал ничего о том, как преследуется русский язык на Украине. Вы знаете, недавно было закрыто без судебного решения 3 телеканала, самых популярных, которые пользовалась русскоязычная аудитория. Русскоязычным гражданам, их семьям запрещаются обучать детей на родном языке. И самое главное, Украина стала единственной страной в мире, которая вводит санкции персональные против своих граждан. Такого я, честно говоря, нигде не встречал. И отвечая на выступление главы украинской делегации по санкциям за Северный поток-2, он сказал, что введение этого газовой магистрали будет способствовать наращиванию экономической и военной мощи России. По этой логике Украина уже 30 лет, перекачивая российский газ в Европу, постоянно оказывает помощь по повышению экономической и оборонной мощи России. Но на самом деле, как сказал наш президент, просто украинцы и их покровители хотят, чтобы за счет Российской Федерации, за счет получения огромных денег за перекачку этого газа по трубопроводной системе восстанавливалась экономика Украины. И последнее. Вот мечта господина Потуроева выстроить железный занавес, она не произойдет. Россия была, если будет европейской державой, мы открыты к сотрудничеству и конструктивному взаимодействию с каждой европейской страной. Спасибо.
Thank you. The floor now to Mr. Cohen from USA, please.
Thank you, and good day to everyone participating. It's good to be back with the OSCE and to know it's doing its good work. Mr. Bush, I commend you on your remarks and on your challenging agenda. We've heard a lot today about issues around the world, and they all play together. The gentleman from Belarus, a country which I've visited on 2 occasions and enjoyed my visits, mentioned the problem of drugs. And drugs is a problem. But you have to realize the reason people do drugs is because they lack hope and they lack opportunity to participate in the culture and free speech and in their government. And the longer that governments repress people's rights and not give them free speech and free thought and freedom, the more people will use drugs. The answer to drugs, even more so than police efforts to eliminate them, is governments allowing its citizens to have freedom. When I was in Minsk, I went to a restaurant, went to the same restaurant twice. And the second time there was a young waitress working at our table. And I asked her if she liked living in Minsk and in Belarus. And she looked around as if she thought maybe somebody could be watching her. And she leaned over and she whispered to me, "No, there is no future here. I want to leave." That has stayed with me from those days that I was there. Belarus has wonderful people, and they need to give them an opportunity to have freedom to stay there. The same goes for Russia. You stand on Navalny's neck and you send gulag, people will rise up. Freedom is the ultimate power that we must protect. I thank you for allowing me to participate here in this OSCE and look forward to further discussions.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Shufrik from Ukraine, please.
Нестор Иванович, микрофон.
Sir, you're muted. Can you turn on your microphone, please? We cannot hear you.
Алло, сейчас лучше? Алло, вы слышите меня?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you one more, Mr. Chairman Hudson. I am happy to hear you and see you. Unfortunately, I cannot meet you. Hope that, I can do it next time in not virtual, but я продолжу на русском языке в знак солидарности с теми нашими гражданами, которые сегодня лишены права использования русского языка во всех сферах деятельности, как это гарантируется Конституцией Украины. Кстати, я мог бы и на венгерском языке сказать, и на словацком, но, к сожалению, эти языки не языки использования на парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ. Köszönöm szépen, Вельми сом счастный вас видеть. Меня возмущает то отношение, которое сегодня есть к русскоязычным нашим гражданам и к представителям национальных меньшин, но мы видим, что наша позиция сегодня не нравится власти. И в этой связи я хочу поблагодарить госпожу Терезу Рибейро, представителя по вопросам свободы СМИ, которая уже 3 февраля отреагировала на моем полное убеждение неконституционный и незаконный указ о запрете трансляции 3 телеканалов. Это беспрецедентное решение в историю независимой Украины. Право на закрытие телеканалов предоставляется украинскому суду, а не чиновникам, в том числе и президенту Украины. В чем причина? Реальная причина – это резкое падение рейтинга господина президента и его правящей партии. Рейтинг обвалился за год более чем в 3 раза, до 15-20% соответственно. И другой причиной оппозиционных политических сил и 3 телеканалов, которые говорили правду, власть не нашла. При этом обвинив одного из акционеров этих телеканалов, внимание, в террористической деятельности, и его гражданскую супругу уже через 2,5 недели в террористической деятельности обвинили лидера нашей партии, которая сегодня лидирует по рейтингу поддержки в стране Виктора Медведчука, его супруги Оксаны Марченко. Я сегодня обращаю внимание на то, что фактически власть использует методы сталинских репрессий 30-х годов. И это, безусловно, вызывает у нас беспокойство. С другой стороны, абсолютно и руководителя и отдельных коллег, к сожалению, мы наблюдаем застой в реализации Минских соглашений, а я могу сказать, реальная причина для этого – это отсутствие воли, давление праворадикалов, как и на независимые СМИ, так и на руководство нашей страны. К сожалению, этому давлению поддают. В этих условиях надеяться становится крайне сложно. Надеюсь, что нашими объединенными усилиями сможем этого все-таки добиться. Прошу поддержки, понимания и благодарю за вашу позицию. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you. Now to Mr. Turay Ganjaliev from Azerbaijan, please.
Dear Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, I would like to, with a great sense of satisfaction, I would like to say that one of the hotspots in the OSCE area has finally been resettled, and after the long-standing years of Armenian occupation and aggression, Azerbaijan managed to restore its territorial integrity And finally, one of the hotspots of the OSCE area has been resettled. In these terms, we are thinking completely about the peaceful coexistence in the region, also the economic cooperation between Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and a new era has begun in our region. Azerbaijan entered into a new stage of post-conflict rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reintegration. The government has already initiated the practical steps aiming at eliminating consequences of decades-long occupation of the territories, accompanied by massive destruction. Azerbaijan also is willing to fully reintegrate its citizens of Armenian origin residing in conflict-affected territories into its political, social, economic space, guaranteeing the same rights and freedoms with all the citizens of Azerbaijan, regardless of their ethnic, religious affiliation. As it was the case in the previous years before the Armenian occupation, the Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan was a very developed region, and of course, after the ending occupation, we are looking forward to invest billions of dollars investments into the region, and we are thinking only in terms of peace, in terms of prosperity, in terms of peaceful coexistence again of both nations in the region. And of course, I believe that this kind of approach will bring much more positive result into the region, and OSCE area will take benefit from these new realities. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Karasin from the Russian Federation, please.
Спасибо большое, господин председатель. Прежде всего, мне хотелось бы приветствовать назначение Кайрата Абдрахманова на должность Верховного комиссара ОБСЕ по делам национальных меньшинств. Мы рассматриваем это как признание его высокого профессионализма и, естественно, желаем ему успехов в работе на этом ответственном посту. Отмечу, что впервые в истории организации один из руководящих постов получил представитель Содружества независимых государств. Это полностью соответствует основополагающим принципам работы ОБСЕ, ее процедурным нормам, закрепляющим равенство всех государств-участников. Рассчитываем, что это лишь первый шаг к выравниванию, выправлению географических дисбалансов в ее кадровой структуре. Ожидаем, что Верховный комиссар ОБСЕ по делам национальных меньшинств будет выстраивать работу в строгом соответствии с мандатом, проявлять беспристрастность, объективность, учитывать весь спектр мнений государств-участников ОБСЕ. Особого внимания заслуживает проблема соблюдения языковых и образовательных прав национальных меньшинств на пространстве ОБСЕ, особенно на Украине. Мы уже слышали от представителей разных стран озабоченности по этому поводу, и в странах Прибалтики, где они бесцеремонно попираются. Ну и, наконец, в том, что касается излишне эмоциональных высказываний в адрес моей страны представителей Украины, мне хотелось бы пожелать абсолютно откровенно от чистого сердца, чтобы украинское государство быстрее шло по пути строительства современного общества и современного государства. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you. The floor now to Mr. Johann from Armenia, please. Mr. Konjorian, Armenia. Okay, we'll move then to the next speaker, Ms. Ageyeva from Azerbaijan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, dear colleagues. I'm greeting all the participants. It's a honor and pleasure to be among you here today. I'd like to comment on one of the facts contrary to international humanitarian law. You all are aware that Azerbaijan's army has liberated occupied by the Azerbaijan has restored historical justice. Now, Azerbaijan is trying to ensure for people living in peace and security on land to carry out construction works in the liberated territories to create new infrastructures. But what we face today, of particular concern is Armenia's refusal to mined areas in the recently liberated territories. The Azerbaijan is situated under humanitarian law. This is an measure envisaged in the international humanitarian law to save human lives and accelerate post-conflict rehabilitation and reconstruction processes. In the period following the signing of the bilateral statement, of Azerbaijan, including 9 civilians killed, 65 citizens, including 8 civilians, were seriously wounded as a result of mine explosion. I have to mention that as a result of this, the military are losing their lives in those areas. Obtaining that map will prevent the loss of innocent people. The resolution of this issue is one of the steps and security in the region. And Azerbaijan has support of peace. In any case, even if it will take time, Azerbaijan will not back down from its goals, because the way of Azerbaijan is the way of the truth. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And I recognize me, Helen Sommer from Germany. Okay, we understand Mr. had to leave, so we have 2 speakers left. Mr. Obradovic from Serbia. Mr. Obradovic from Serbia is not connected, I understand. So we come to the last speaker on our list for the general debate, and it's Mr. Mike Wood from the United Kingdom. Please, Mr. Wood.
Thank you very much, and I will be extremely brief, as I know obviously we are short on time. But I'd like to thank the rapporteur and the presentations that we had at the start of this meeting, and touch briefly on the issue of international cooperation, particularly in the field of tackling terrorism. A decade ago, it looked clear that the biggest threats to certainly Western European and North American countries from terrorism came from a coordinated network of terrorist actions, really coordinated through Al-Qaeda network, and then later on supported through Daesh, who obviously through the midpoint of the last decade controlled much of Northern Africa going into Iraq. But whilst the horrific attacks in Austria, in France, and of course in my own country, amongst others, last year show that there are still those who would seek to use their twisted versions of religion as a motivation to attack people. Increasingly, the mode of terrorism facing member states is changing. Instead of that coordinated network, we are seeing more independent actors. And I do think we need to be careful of the terms we use. When we talk about things like lone actors, then obviously it does suggest that these people are isolated from society, that they're acting without really communicating with each other. This isn't usually the case. It paints a false picture. They do communicate, and the way that we tackle, the way that we intercept these terrorist attacks has to be shaped by that. And that does mean that internationally, we do need to be working together, not just at a government level, but also, of course, with the social media companies that too often provide a platform, means of communications that these independent actors are able to plan, to coordinate, and to implement their devastating and deadly attacks.
Thank you very much. This concludes the open general debate. It also concludes the time we had, and I thank very much our interpreters from their work. We'll continue now for the next minutes. We will not have interpretation anymore. And now I give the floor back to our vice chair of the committee, Mr. Dunaba, who's chairing the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gustavo. Colleagues, I would now like to offer the speakers an opportunity to respond very briefly to any points that they may have heard in the general debate. We would welcome 1 minute interventions each in the order of the agenda. First, our rapporteur, Lorinas Kaciunas. Lorinas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be very short. I heard all ideas. I will try preparing the report, of course, to have it in mind. So, and of course, consider everything what was said. So thank you for your ideas, for your comments, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Lorinas. Ambassador Bash.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the comments we've received. We look forward to working with the Parliamentary Assembly on issues which have been raised today, including on counter-terrorism, and thank you for all of your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Bush. Now, Ambassador Abrahamov.
I would like to thank you sincerely for congratulations with my appointment. This is really the first time when a representative from the CIS country was appointed to such an important position in our organization. I'm going to do my best in order to promote even more closer partnership between my office and the Parliamentary Assembly as soon as we have quite a big agenda for our common endeavor. Much depends on our joint efforts, especially when it comes to the improvement of legislation related to the national minorities, as well as implementation. And I take this opportunity to thank you very much for your efforts in the way of providing substantial legislative basis for the further advancement of participating states in their sustainable development. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Cevic. Now we move on to our final item on the agenda for today.
Sorry, Mr. Dunaba, we still need to hear it from Ambassador Cevic.
I'm sorry. Yes, please, Ambassador Cevic.
Thank you very much. I'll be very, very brief. I again reiterate my gratitude for all the support to the SMM, and also underline that even in the difficult conditions, SMM will be, as the whole team, would be supportive of all the endeavors for reaching a solution to the crisis that it is monitoring. And I again repeat my appeal, especially on the crossings and opening of the ECPs, which will be greatly affecting positively the sufferings of the people on both sides of the contact line. Thank you very much.
Thank you, also, Ambassador. Colleagues, we now move on to our final item on the agenda for today. Does any member wish to raise any other business at this time? We don't have any member. It's been a fruitful discussion, and I would like to thank all of our speakers today for their contributions. The interpreters, without whom we could not talk to each other, and the professionals from the Secretariat who organize all of our meetings. The committee's next meeting is scheduled for July 6-10, and we hope to meet healthy on that occasion. I now declare the 2021 winter meeting of the Oec Parliamentary Assembly's General Committee on Political Affairs and Security closed. Thank you.
Thank you.